Today I opened the Age and there was a gift. On page 13 of today's Age, the 21st of July, there's an article by Barry Jones, and it's on intelligent discussion, all but extinct. And I thought, I have to read this. So, one, because it's Barry, and two, because I think he's right. And he goes on to talk, it starts with a comment he makes on Tony Abbott's view of what constitutes carbon monoxide. And Tony Abbott was giving a speech in Dandenong, and he said that it's very hard to talk about carbon monoxide because carbon monoxide is invisible and it's weightless and you can't smell it. So the implication is that Tony is not educated. Then Barry goes on to refute all that information, and then he goes to this point, and I'm jumping quite a lot into the article for good reason. In 1860, in New York, Abraham Lincoln began his campaign for the presidency with a very complex speech about slavery at the Cooper Union, 7,500 words long, complex and nuanced. All four New York newspapers published the complete text, which was sent by telegraph across the United States and widely read and discussed. In 1860, the technology was limited, but the ideas presented by presidential aspirants were not profound or sophisticated. Today's aspirants to the presidency have nothing to say in comparison with what Lincoln was talking about in 1860. He goes on to talk about the 1872 Education Act and the debate in 2006. And he says this, again I'm paraphrasing, in 1872 the minister, J. Wilberforce Stephen, quoted the poet and educational reformer Matthew Arnold 8 times in his speech and expressed the hope that legislation would set an example to our progenitors in England. There was no comparable ambition in 2006. No ideas on education were mentioned, and it is doubtful how many MPs in 2006 would have recognised Arnold's name. Barry suggested, as part of his work, that it might actually be time to define education, something omitted in the draft bill, and to explore its role in personal and community life. But this was rejected as too ambitious. Now, it's very interesting that a government would reject the notion of defining education because that was considered too ambitious. It is, ladies and gentlemen, an extremely serious problem in this country. We have a very corrupt education system, and I use corrupt in the sense, pardon me, of rotting and decaying. And I want to substantiate that claim this way. The federal government introducing the idea that literacy and numeracy should be the right of every child is, in essence, a fundamentally good idea. No one would argue that a child shouldn't be able to read or to count. However, in assessing that, what happens is you have to devise tests. There is nothing wrong with testing. But in the devising of the testing, what has happened is that the tests have been directed to the lowest common denominator, so the highest number of children will pass, therefore giving us a very good figure for how literate and how numerate we are. I wonder how many people have read the NAPLAN tests online. Has anyone read a NAPLAN test? So you know what I'm talking about. When it says, the child is asked to look at a sentence and it says, the brid sat on the tree. Circle the wrong word. That has nothing to do with literacy. that is busy work. There are teachers out there teaching that type of test exclusively. They are teaching that way because they believe their school will receive extra money based on the idea that the school will get a good result. In some schools, children are excluded from taking the test because it's a known fact that they will bring the average down. So education has now been brought into a type of league where, if we want to examine the strength of our school, we'll take out the weak links, test the bright ones, because we know they'll pass. That is not education. The failure of a definition in this country existing in education, for education politically, is indicative of the thinking of state and federal governments. I've been involved in education for nearly 50 years. As a student learning about teaching, one of the things we had to do was define education. What is it to educate? You can go to the website of any Department of Education in this country. You will not find a definition. You will read things about global excellence, cutting-edge teaching, providing outstanding facilities for the development of each individual child's mind and place in the world, but almost no reference to teaching and learning. I define education as that process which enables an individual to have the body and the mind developed sequentially to a point where you can say, this person is educated. I see it as a finite process. By that I'm not implying we can't learn constantly through our lives, but it is our education which helps us to learn. Which leads me to the next point. There are two reasons for going to school. One is to learn how to think. The second is to learn how to learn. You can consider yourself educated when you have achieved that. You can think and you know how to learn and you know where to go. I'm going to give you a couple of banal examples of that failure of knowing about thinking and learning. I was in the library of the Conservatorium, Sydney, teaching, and this student, a music student, came up to me and said, where in the catalogue would I find music by Mozart? I did that. I laughed. And I said, look under M for music. And the student came back and said, there's no M for music and I can't find Mozart. Now, I felt like an idiot, but I said, oh, silly me. Fancy giving you that information. Come with me, I'll show you how to use the catalogue. Now, this was a child, a second-year student, who had no concept of using a library catalogue. And it was the day before days before computers, right? It was card cataloguing. That response from that child, or that student, led me then to ask the students in my charge, what really did they know? What was their general reading? What was their general knowledge about? What were they interested in? And it was staggering to find out how extraordinarily ignorant they were and how they were not hungry to remove that state. And one of the things education should do is instill in the child a hunger for learning how to learn and a hunger for learning how to think. Barry identifies all of this brilliantly lucidly in this article. My real business in education is music education. In music, we can make children literate. We can also teach music to the point that children can make decisions about music without necessarily reading or writing music. There are plenty of people who go to concerts who have no idea about the way music works, no idea about the technical side of music, but understand what's going on and can talk lucidly because of A, their general reading, B, their interest in language, drama, poetry, music, art and other things. All of these things feeding into their education. In music, when we talk about educating children musically, my view is we should, in this country, have the capacity to educate every child in music through singing. This is cost-free in the sense that no expense is incurred in buying an instrument. When a child sings, a child goes into a very special state of being with the body. The brain responds in a very special way to singing. The brain loves it when the child sings. When the child sings, and we do this very early in the child's life, we work on the principle that the child is learning this singing through copying, through imitation. In other words, in order to understand, they have to listen very hard and then repeat what has been sung. That is a very powerful tool in all learning. Children have a capacity to remember enormous numbers of songs, enormous numbers of words, and recall them immediately. It is not because they have an innate gift for music. It is simply that's how the brain works. Every kindergarten class, every kindergarten child could learn hundreds of songs, hundreds of nursery rhymes, and repeat them on demand. It requires no talent. They can do it. What it does do, however, is develop a capacity for focus, concentration, and the ability to reproduce something learned through the ear. From a large vocabulary of known material, we can then teach children how to be literate. How do we read the songs we know? Let's identify this song from its pitch or its rhythm. And in my practice, and I have worked with very young children from scratch, teaching them how to read music, the routine is quite simple. You teach a large body of known material, you take a known song, you write the known song on the board, they read the known song, and then gradually from that they start to read the rhythm and the pitch, because you give them the wherewithal how to do that, either with time names or with solfa names or solfege names. It's quite structured and it's sequential. There are ways in which you introduce the patterns, ways in which you introduce the concept of meter and the concept of rhythm. Many music educators have thought that the best way to do this is to give the child an introduction to literacy through things other than musical notation. So let's start with ducks and flowers. The notes on the stave are ducks, or the notes on the stave are flowers or cars or all that sort of thing. When that happens in education, that's the beginning of the dumbing down process. They will never read a piece of music composed of ducks. I know of no such piece in the repertoire where I have opened a score and I have seen ducks all over the page. And that's what's happening all over the place in education. It's insulting. What it says to the child is, you're silly. You can't cope with the real notation. You actually can't read anything. So we're going to go to the lowest common denominator and take it down that path. What's interesting about musical literacy and teaching children to read, and they can read early, is that it has a profound impact on how they then write their own language and how they then use numbers, calculation. So that a child who has the advantage of a seriously, sequentially developed music education has an advantage in all other areas of learning. That is not a reason for teaching music. It's a bonus. The reason for teaching music is that it's good in its own right, and that what it does for the spirit, the heart and the mind and the soul of a child is immeasurable and priceless. That's enough reason to have it. But then to have the bonus that a child who is exposed to this in a systematic and sequential way has advantages in all areas of learning. That is no longer anecdotal, it is proven. There is strong scientific evidence gathered now from neuroscientists all over the world. In fact, the neuroscientists and the neurologists are staggered at the results that keep coming in about the power of music in relation to the brain. In this country, 80% of children have no music. None. The 20% that have it in varying ways. Some of them have endless diets of pop songs played on CDs by their teachers. When I questioned a teacher about this and said, "Why do you only play Kylie Minogue?" And he said, "The children like it." And I said, "The children like Mars bars. And do you feed them Mars bars on a daily basis and nothing else?" The argument, specious they may be, went right over his head. It was okay for children, for their minds to be screwed up by endless Kylie Minogue, but the idea that they could do anything else was absolutely beyond him. I encountered a teacher recently in a circumstance where my task was to get the children to compose as a group in class, a common thing one does in music, because in the end, the real reason we teach music is for children to make their own music, to be involved in the way music works. And this teacher said to me, "My children don't compose, they're not interested in composing, they just like to listen to songs." And I said, "Well, given that much, do you mind if I have a shot?" And he said, "Go ahead." So the theme was bushfire recovery. I was obviously in a region where there had been bushfires. So I started by saying to the children, "We're going to write a song about recovering from bushfires. I want you to think of some words that might reflect that." And this kid put a hand up and she said, "Rebuilding." So I wrote "rebuilding" on the board. And another one said, "Trees growing again." Marvellous. "Hope," said another one. Anyway, all the words came out, and I said, "Now, can someone give me a sentence?" And this child said, "We will rebuild our homes." I said, "That's marvellous. Here's a little xylophone. On these two notes, can someone come and make up a tune?" And this kid went, "We will rebuild our homes." I was very happy with that. We all sang it. It was very easy to learn. It was short. Sign of a wonderful composition, brevity. So then we added things to this, and accompaniments and percussion, a little bit of movement. The teacher was gobsmacked. He said, "I had no idea these kids could do this." I said, "It's because you've never asked them." And this is the point. While we continue in this country to accept as a community that the child's mind has no value, and that's what we tacitly agree to. We tacitly agree to that as a community, that the child's mind has no value. We will remain forever like Tony Abbott saying that carbon monoxide can't be measured. Thank you.